building the Elves Falath Evo, the latest and greatest version of the Falath for 2023. The bike industry moves faster than a cheetah on espresso. We're going to dive deep into the build of the Elves Falath Evo, showcasing every step of the way. Did I mention that we have Johnny building the bike? He's been a bike mechanic for a whopping 18 years. Rumour has it he can install a GP 5000 tyre with one hand. First up, the seat post, the unsung hero of bike comfort and stability. We've got the rubber seal to take care of. We want to make sure our ride stays dry and free from unwanted waterworks, so we put that seal into place onto the seat post. Johnny whacks some gloves on. Things are getting serious.
Are you ready?
Yes.
As we take a moment to admire the frame, Johnny points out there is noise dampening tubing inside the frame already, which is a nice touch. We can then loosen the seat clamping bolt, ready for the seat post to be installed. There was this travel size tube of carbon grip that came with the frame, like one of those mini toothpaste. Another nice touch. Now, we generously applied this to the clamp, the seat post, and inside the frame as well, ensuring a secure and slip-free connection. No wobbly seat post or random slippage here. Now, you'll notice that the torque wrench is a little bit too tight to the seat post. Now, the best way around this is with an extension, which gives us enough room to dance. You can also get a compact torque wrench which would fit in this little space. Now, tighten that bad boy up to 6 Newton meters. It's like giving the seat post a gentle but firm hug. Now, remember, my fellow bike enthusiasts, torque is important for tightening bolts. Not too tight to cause damage, not too loose to let things wiggle or slip. Now, check with the manufacturer if you are unsure on the torque specs. It's time to take our bike to new heights. Quite literally. We're going to put our soon-to-be two-wheel beauty into the stand for some stability and convenience. Now, before we go any further, let's get one thing straight. No clamping frame tubes in the stand. The seat post is the only thing we are going to be clamping. We'll respect the bike's wishes. Johnny also compared the housing in the frame to the ones that he brought with him. Now, we have gear and brake housing, and both are different sizes, so we need the right ones for the right housing. We'll use a combination, which you will see later in the video. Now, Johnny also looked over the frame at this point to check all the routing before jumping the gun. A quick point about the front mech.
So this cable stop here has a sort of inset there for the cable out to go in. So that means it kind of increases your options of running different front mechs, even like the older generation front mechs that don't need an outer to the mech itself. So it's not bad, that's a good design, I guess. So with this as well, if you're changing the gear outer, you might have to take the bottom bracket out and replace it. Or if you can get away with it, you could try and remove this, which might not, actually thinking about it, might not be easy because as you can see, it gets kind of stuck in there.
There was a different insert you can use if you want the housing to go all the way up to the rear mech, so you can simply swap them out if you wanted to. The fork, the gateway to smooth steering and control. Now, before we go crazy and start making any cuts to the fork steerer, let's take a moment to measure and prepare. We want to make sure that it's a perfect length for this build and my body geometry and my bike fit. Now, first of all, gather the necessary spacers, headset items. There are a few moving parts, so we want to make sure we have everything in place and ready to go. We lay them out in all their glory, like a visual feast of what's to come. There's an instruction sticker clinging to the fork steerer, and it's time for us to bid it farewell. Obviously, read it first because it tells you where everything goes. Most importantly on the instructions is it tells us the 7mm black bearing goes on the top and the 8mm red bearing goes on the bottom. With a satisfying peel and a flick, the sticker is gone. We can now install the bottom bearing, the forks, the C-clip and the top bearing cover. No grease yet, as this is just a test fit. We then slid the bars on, which gives us this sort of seamless look from the frame to the bars. Now, it does look spicy, I'm not going to lie, and it has that perfect transition to the frame and bars, but I may need some washers. So now comes the interesting part, which is comparing the new Falath Evo frame to its predecessor, the Falath Pro, which I built last year. Thanks to the wonders of the Bike Insights website, we can confirm that both frames share a similar geometry. It's like finding a long lost twin, only in bike form. We rejoice in the fact that our new frame is a worthy successor to its older sibling, and we can basically mimic the geometry, which is very handy indeed. Now, for reference, I am 176 centimeters, which is a smidgen over 5'9", and this frame is a size 52. I ponder my bike fit from a few months ago that I had done on the Falath Pro, so the predecessor to this bike that we're building today. Now, based on that experience, we decided that a 10mm spacer would be just right for me. Comfort triumphs aesthetics, even though I may have wanted that slammed look.
It's so beautiful.
At this point, just check everything again and be sure. Now that we have all the headset and spacers all lined up, it's time to mark the fork steerer with a file. We do this at the top of the stem. Now that we've marked the fork steerer, it's time to check that against the expander plug. So we remove all the spacers and washers and carefully remove the fork from the frame. Johnny, who is our resident mechanic extraordinaire, explains how to take the height of the compression plug into account when making your cut.
So what I'm doing here now is just measuring to get a good gap between this wedge and then the top cap, so otherwise if they start touching then you're not going to be able to get enough compression of the headset, which will lead to play.
So that's the original.
That's pretty much from the top of the stem. Figure out now we need to go a bit lower from that mark. If I bring it here, it's not good because then it'll be too flush. If it's there, it might be a bit too high relative to the top cap here. So we probably want to go a little bit lower down, beneath. At least maybe up to 10
from the original.
From the original mark here, yeah.
So the second mark is where we will actually cut, and that's around 8 to 10 millimeters lower than the first mark we made at the top of the stem. Some electrical tape is added around the fork, which is going to help prevent fraying when we make the cut, and we are ready to go. To cut the steerer, we venture outside. It's a strategy to avoid turning the workshop into a dust-covered carbon land. Nature becomes our accomplice in maintaining some sort of cleanliness. We install the vise onto the table, the cutting guide into the vise, then the fork into the cutting guide, aligning with the mark we made on the steerer tube. Make sure you get the correct mark though. Remember, you made 2. Now before we dive in, there's one thing we need to take care of: water suppression. We spray some water on the hacksaw and the fork, which is going to keep the dust and heat at bay. We continuously do this as we make the cut. And now the moment of truth: our hacksaw diligently slides through the steerer tube as Johnny performs this delicate operation. He has perfected his craft with wrists as swift as a ninja, guiding the saw with finesse. Who would have thought that today you'd be tuning in to watch a synchronized dance between man and his tool?
What?
It's time for a test fit. We carefully reassemble all the components back into the frame, including the bearings, washers, spacers, forks themselves, and the stem. As we focus on the top of the compression plug, we take some close-up shots to showcase the difference between its position and the top nut. You can see that the 8 to 10 mil of space between the top nut and the compression plug. When the top nut is tightened, this space is reduced, removing any play in your headset. That is why you need to make sure you have that gap. Talking about the top nut, it's time for it to make its grand entrance. It's like a crown on a royal bike. And just when you thought we were done with the fork install, it looks great, it's time to just remove everything again, because we need to route all the cables through the frame. The joys of bike building. Let's tackle the rear gear cable first. We start by removing the frame inserts, those handy plastic clips that hold the rear brake and gear housing in place. It's like opening the gates, clearing a way for our cable routing adventure. I say adventure because it could go many ways.
It's about the journey.
We can unravel the gear housing that came with the group set and offer it up against a frame to make sure the piece we are using will run the full length. It will. We slide it in from the back, starting at the chainstay. Going from back to front makes the process a breeze, ensuring that the cable finds its way effortlessly up to the head tube. Now, as we guide the cable at the bottom bracket, the cable gracefully ascends a down tube. I know, it goes up the down tube, and lo and behold, at the head tube, the housing pops out for its moment in the spotlight. We slide on a noise dampening sleeve. This will ensure that our bike whispers through the gears. No clattering or rattling here, just smooth and silent shifting. Finally, we reinsert the plastic frame guide, securing everything in place, completing the picture of a well-routed cable. Now for this bike build, I opted for a Shimano 105 11-speed hydraulic disc group set. Let me tell you, it is a steal of a deal at the moment. Now I managed to grab it for £450 and it comes with everything you need, and I mean everything. This is great bang for your buck. In the package, it had the gear cables, it had the front and rear derailleurs, it had the shifters with hydraulic housings already attached, it had brake rotors, it had the calipers, the crankset with both chain rings, and even the chain. So literally a complete group set. Now here is a secret behind its inevitable low price. The new 105 electric group sets have been released, making this particular version old stock. But hey, we're not here to follow the trends blindly. We're here to build a bike that performs exceptionally without emptying our wallets. Time to get the rear derailleur installed.
This is obviously a standard hanger. This is more the direct mount hanger, so it will directly fit on the rear mech. As you can see, it's a bit longer, so you'll see
Did that one come with a group set?
This comes with the frame set. This will only fit Shimano Shadow rear mechs. Shadow mech's more in line, a bit more, let's say, doesn't stick out as much from the frame, from the back. Hence why it's called Shadow mech. All the spring's done over from here, not like the old mechs. Obviously, the old mechs had spring there and here. From what I've seen, it has increased the reliability of the mechs. They seem to last longer as well with this design as well.
As we are using a Shadow style rear derailleur, we can remove the derailleur hanger that came installed with the frame and install the derailleur hanger specific for the Shadow derailleur.
Okay, so this hanger will act as this piece. So we'll get it on. Should make it look more sleek as well. So there we go.
We can then install the rear mech into the hanger with the same bolt. Now be sure to add some grease to make it easier for your future self or mechanic who will need to remove it in the future. With the derailleur installed, we can add the cable housing and make sure that we have enough cable for the rear mech to move, as well as enough cable at the head tube to go through the bars. To determine the correct length for the front gear cable, we take a closer look from the bottom bracket inside the frame. We want to see where the housing ends in the stop inside the frame. Now here comes the tricky part. We need to guide the end of the gear cable inside the frame into the cable stop. A task that requires patience and finesse. And not to forget, we need to add an end cap onto the end of the housing before it goes into the stop, just to keep things tidy and secure. Now when using this particular cable stop with the frame, we need to install the cable from front to back. There is another cable stop that came in the packaging that goes all the way through the frame and allows the housing to basically go all the way to the front derailleur. We need to ensure there is enough slack in the cables to go beneath the bottom bracket. To add some extra magic into the mix, we apply the noise dampening sort of foam, if you like, to the housing. Now it's time to install the rear brake hose through the frame. Now first, we unwind the hydraulic hose that's already connected to the rear caliper. It's like releasing a coiled spring, allowing the hose to extend and flex. Now before we install the hose into the frame, we must make sure to put the frame clip or guide onto the hose. We wouldn't want to miss this step and have to backtrack later to install it, which we may or may not have done.
But well, prove it.
We then push the hose through the rear into the chainstay and guide it into the down tube, carefully maneuvering the hose to ensure a smooth and clean installation. Again, you can guide it from the bottom bracket. Once the hose is in place, we can simply clip the frame insert back into position. Now it's time to mount the rear caliper. We need this installed to help determine our final length of hose at the bars. We realised that the bolts that came with the group set are too long for this particular caliper. No worries though, we scrounge around and find some suitable bolts that fit the bill. My trusty old parts bag coming to the rescue for a second build in a row. Starting to get a little bit close.
Bloody shambles.
We also need to check the cables around the bottom bracket again, as the foam might make them slightly wider. Now we want to make sure everything fits together harmoniously and doesn't cause any unnecessary friction for the bike to be in discomfort. At this point, Johnny realised I was missing the adapter for the rear caliper.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
Long story short, Shimano group sets are designed for a front rotor that is 160 and a rear rotor that is 140. Now I have 160 rotors for the front and the rear. So to install the 160 at the rear, I'll need the adapter, which I don't have. To be honest, this is the first missing part in 4 builds, so you can't be too disappointed with me. I'll get the adapter on order so we can use a 160mm rotor. For the front caliper, we need to make a small adjustment by swapping the mount around from 140 to 160.
So it was that way. So now we're going this way.
Next, we push the brake hose through the forks, carefully gliding it along its intended path, ensuring the hose is routed smoothly without any kinks.
So when you have the mount this way, you got to put the bolt in first at the top and actually start inserting it first, because if you don't do that, you'll end up scratching the caliper at the top here.
So that's just a design, you can't...
It's just a design of the caliper, yeah.
Is that all Shimano or...?
Yeah, Shimano. Might be other brands, I think even the SRAM ones as well.
Now we move to the top of the fork steerer and install the expander plug. Before inserting the plug though, we apply carbon grip paste to enhance the grip and prevent any slipping. We tighten the expander plug to a torque of 7 Newton meters, making sure it's snug and secure. We add some carbon grip to the stem. Now we apply grease to the crown race. which is the lower bearing surface on the fork. We slide the bearing into the fork, carefully making sure it goes over the front brake hose. Johnny, our knowledgeable mechanic, takes a moment to talk about the cable entry on the fork.
So the routing for this hose through the fork is pretty decent because it's not right quite in the middle, but it's near enough, and I guess it's going to be good for routing the hose either to the right, which is normal for us in the UK for the front brake, or even on the left for international.
To help guide the front brake hose where we want it to go, we attach it to the fork using electrical tape. This makes the installation progress easier as the cable's already pretty much routed where we need it to go. Now we move on to the top bearing. We apply a generous amount of grease and slide it over all the cables coming out of the head tube. With a gentle touch, we place the bearing into the frame. We can carefully place the fork into the frame, making sure that all the cables are where we want them to be. The front gear and rear brake cables go on the left side, while the rear gear and front brake cables go on the right side. Left to right here we've got gear, brake, brake, gear.
So gear, brake, gear, yeah.
It's time to double check the slack in the cables at the bottom bracket. We want to ensure that there is enough play for smooth shifting and braking. We don't want it to be rubbing and hitting the bottom bracket. Next we can add our 10mm spacer or washer to the forks. Let's not forget about the material of the washer as well. It's plastic, which is good because it's softer than the carbon steerer. That is what we like to see. Here is what the finished product looks like, all cables in the correct place, ready to go through the bars. That concludes part 1 of the build. Do subscribe for part 2, which is incoming very, very soon. And click here to watch me unbox this affordable Elves Falath Evo Superbike frame set and give it a good once over. Quite insightful. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.